Welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to fight a thorn bush and then try to play with a sawzall. We ended the last episode with me trying to chop up all these branches from this thorn bush in the corner of my yard, and I have no idea what type of plant this is, but I can tell you that I found out very quickly it is absurdly sharp. It was cutting straight through the leather gloves I was wearing, and it had no issue piercing my jeans. Even though I used the shears to grab, maneuver, and cut this entire pile, I still managed to slice up the majority of my arm doing this. That was strike one against this thorn bush, which was already starting to piss me off. Strike two is that despite the fact I had chopped all of this down 2 days ago, all of this green growth that you see here is new growth that started since I last cut this. That means there's significant portions of this bush, which I thought I had killed, that grew between 1 and 2 feet in the span of 2 days. So when I tried to tell you that this is an invasive thorn bush, I really cannot emphasize enough how invasive this thing turned out to be. With that, I broke out the shovel and did my best to try to dig this stump out of the ground, still wearing my protective gear because this bush was still exceedingly sharp. That said, this particular day was close to 100% humidity, so it was like working in a sauna, and despite being only roughly 75 degrees, first of all, I was drenching myself in sweat, and second of all, it was getting to the point that it was overheating my camera, which has never overheated before in the 7 years I've owned it. That was strike number 2 against this thorn bush, is making me sweat a disgusting amount because I had to wear the thickest clothes I could to try to deal with it. And strike number 3 is that this area is very densely packed with rocks. This is probably the rockiest soil I have ever dug into, and somehow this bush managed to perfectly wrap all of its roots around every single one of those stones. As a quick point of reference, here's a quick cutaway to some of the stones that I unearthed in the effort to get this thing out of the ground, but I realized quite quickly that I was going to need a little bit more firepower. What I'm not showing in this video is I spent another week trying every way I could find on the internet to kill this stupid thorn bush. I bought the most powerful shrub poison that I could find, and I sprayed it every day for that week. I cut off all of the new growth every single morning, and then I tried literally torching this thing with MAP gas to light it on fire in the hopes that it would dry it out more. None of these worked, and it continued to grow at the same rate. This thing is like the Rasputin of plants that you don't want. I legitimately cannot explain to you how this thing did not die. At least I couldn't yet, because as you'll see in a very future episode, these roots extended something like 35 feet in each direction, which is why it just kept pulling nutrients from other places. So once again, my statement that this is an invasive species, that was a gross miscalculation of just how bad this thing was. So after hours of additional research, a couple trips to the hardware store, and a bit of advanced planning, what I got was the biggest pruning blade I could possibly find in a sawzall that my dad no longer cared about. And with all of these, I developed the fastest way that I have found to remove a shrub from the ground, by cutting it away from its roots and then ripping it from the earth. I've done a full video on this already that I will link in the description below that goes into a little bit more detail, but even with the really rocky soil here, this method was super effective, and I cannot tell you how many hours it saved me on this one bush alone, considering how much of a pain this was to dig. I had already dug down about 1.5 feet in some areas before starting this method, and even at that point, the bottom was nowhere in sight. Of course, it was another super humid day I was doing this, so my camera overheated the moment I pulled this out from the earth, and I don't have that moment immortalized. And while I am disappointed, let's just take a look at the bottom side of this plant real quick so you can see just how thick and how many roots were coming out of this thing. All these roots that I'm pointing out here are typically 2 to 3 inches thick minimum, and like I said, I didn't find out until the future that some of these extended up to 35 feet to other shrubs they were connected to, which just kept feeding this thing nutrients. So with all that said, if you're having a lot of problems with a thorn bush, buy yourself a sawzall. Just do it, spend the money, and you will be very happy that you did, and it feels so good to stab that little thorny bastard back. But having now developed my expert level stump removal technique, I was ready to try it on the rest of the stumps as well, in the hopes that they wouldn't be as cumbersome. And I can tell you right now that all of these other stumps combined were probably less difficult than that one thorn bush. The tricky part about these stumps is that they were just so densely densely packed at the bottom. It was effectively a solid block of wood, so these ones were much heavier for that reason. But what I was able to do was cut up smaller pieces with the Sawzall that were more manageable, and then also use a chain and an engine hoist I already had to pull up some of the larger stumps. The added bonus of pulling them out before chopping them up is that I had an easier time cutting them into manageable pieces, and I was doing less damage to the saw blade because I wasn't sticking it in the dirt. I did burn through probably 3 or 4 blades over the course of the day, but I also removed at least 10 or 12 plants. So realistically, getting 3 or 4 stumps per saw blade and saving several hours each, I will take that trade-off every day of the week. There's also this massive old tree stump that's been there since I purchased the house. I've been slowly adding different things to try to soften that over time, and now it's finally ready for removal. But ultimately, that Sawzall allowed me to do more in one day than I probably could have done in a full week without it. And that is not without its own trade-offs. This was very harsh on the Sawzall. It got really gunked up with the dirt, and it's very difficult to take the blade out to change it now. And just the vibrations alone of running a Sawzall for that long decided to chew through the skin on my hands even with gloves on. But you know what? Pain is temporary, and tree removal is hopefully permanent, because I did the best I could to ensure that these things would never come back again to haunt me, because I am so sick of having to spend so much free time taking care of these stupid things when they don't even look good. This day was a lot of heavy lifting, and I was absolutely cooked, but the only thing left to do at this point was to clean up all of this mess. I don't have footage of this, but all these were loaded onto my trailer. I took them over to somebody else's house where they had a fire pit and we burned them all. But ultimately, it was getting late in the season here, and this was wrapping up summer 3 of the yard renovation project. So we will resume in the spring on summer 4, which is still about 4 years longer than I thought this was going to take. But I will catch you in the next episode. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.